While August has titles like Star Wars Outlaws and World of Warcraft: The War Within to look forward to, Game Science Black Myth Wukong is perhaps one of the most hyped. It's topped Steam's most wishlist game charts for several weeks in a row, and the hype for it is palpable. Launching on August 20th for PS5 and PC, here are 15 things you should know before buying. Boss Rush. Without getting into details about the story, the most basic way to describe Black Myth Wukong based on various previews and footage thus far is that it's a boss rush style game. Multiple bosses have been showcased, and while there are some smaller enemies and areas to explore on top of a cinematic narrative, the boss fights are the main attraction. Combat Basics. By now, it's clear that Black Myth Wukong isn't a Souls-like title, despite having some similar elements, like a stamina bar. From the outset, the protagonist, the Destined One, can utilize light and heavy attacks, comboing them together in various ways. He can also use different stances, like Pillar Stance, to climb atop your extendable staff to evade attacks and restore focus if you're up there long enough. You can then transition into other moves, like a heavy slam attack. Thrust Stance can poke at foes from afar and even knock bosses down. You also have magic, including spells like Immobilize, to stop enemies and bosses in their tracks. Perfect Dodges. Aside from the ability to twirl the staff and destroy incoming projectiles, the Destined One doesn't have a traditional block. Dodging is your means of evading damage, with up to 3 available at a time, after which there's a short cooldown. If you dodge and attack perfectly, an afterimage is left behind while time briefly slows down, potentially allowing for some punishing blows. Perfect dodges also restore focus, allowing a decent balance between evading and unleashing powerful heavy attacks. Transformations and their weapons. The transformations are one of the more intriguing elements of Black Myth Wukong. After defeating certain enemies and bosses, you can transform into them briefly during battles. Taking down a boss named Gongji will allow you to transform into him and utilize some of his moves. Transformations also serve as a means to use different weapons, with Gongji possessing a Flame Blade staff to inflict burn damage over time, as noted by GameSpot in its hands-on preview from June. A lot of spells and transformations. While much has been made about the straightforward skill tree, Black Myth Wukong seemingly emphasizes build variety through spells and transformations. A spokesperson for the developer told Eurogame, "There are a lot of spells and transformations, and the variety in combat allows one to create their own combos and find their own style. This is a level of freedom we want to give to our players." It may not beat the likes of Elden Ring anytime soon, but it still leans more towards action RPG than your typical character action game. Might. Transformations have a separate health bar, so taking damage doesn't affect the Destined One directly. If you're in a bad way, transforming can be ideal for staying in the fight or surviving until the next checkpoint. Forms can last until their health is depleted, but there's another resource to consider: Might, which depletes upon performing different attacks. Transformations are also on a cooldown like spells, so deciding the best time to use them is important. Respawning enemies and fast travel. While you have shrines that act as checkpoints for restoring health and respawning, you do lose some XP on death. Enemies will also respawn, though there are several ways to evade them and rush back to your last death spot. It's also possible to teleport between shrines if you want to revisit previous areas. Loot. Players can discover different kinds of loot while exploring and defeating enemies, including armor with more dense attack power, resistance to status effects, etc. There are different rarities, including rare and epic, with the latter including special effects. For example, the Ginseng Cape allows for gaining a large amount of focus when using the Healing Gourd. On top of loot dropping from enemies, you can also craft different staves and armor sets using materials. Set bonuses. Another interesting element of the loot system is set bonuses. If you equip multiple pieces of armor belonging to the same set, then you'll gain specific effects. While these effects have yet to be detailed, it does add even more customization, especially if you can mix and match different sets for a myriad of bonuses. ray tracing, and NVIDIA DLSS 3.5. As revealed in March, ray tracing and NVIDIA DLSS 3.5 are supported, with the former including fully ray-traced water caustics and reflections, global illumination, and shadows. DLSS 3.5's ray reconstruction is also supported, thus ensuring better performance and image quality. PC requirements. With everything going on visually, you would expect Black Myth: Wukong to have some hefty system requirements. The good news is that they're mostly manageable. You need Windows 10 or 11 64-bit and a whopping 130GB of installation space, regardless of other hardware. Minimum requirements include an Intel Core i5-8400 or AMD Ryzen 5 1600, 16GB of RAM, and an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1060 6GB or AMD Radeon RX 580 8GB for medium settings at 1080p. A hard disk drive is supported, but an SSD is recommended. Recommended requirements include a Core i7-9700 or Ryzen 5 5500, 16GB of RAM, and a GeForce RTX 2060, Radeon RX 5700 XT, or Intel Arc A750. DirectX 12 and a solid-state drive are also necessary for high settings and 1080p. Ultra requirements for very high settings at 4K also require a Core i7-9700 or Ryzen 5 5500, but with an RTX 4070 or RX 7800 XT with 32GB of RAM. As for ray tracing, an Intel Core i5-9400 or AMD Ryzen 5 1600 with a GeForce RTX 3060 and 16GB of RAM are necessary at the minimum for medium settings at 1080p and ray tracing set to low. The same settings at medium ray tracing require a Core i7-9700 or Ryzen 5 5500, RTX 4060, and 16GB of RAM. Finally, for 4K at high settings with ray tracing set to very high, a Core i7-9700 or Ryzen 5 5500, RTX 4080 Super, and 32GB of RAM are necessary. For everything but the bare minimum, an SSD is mandatory. Playtime. Despite the epic premise and setting, Game Science isn't going for a massively long adventure. Speaking to IGN in September of 2020, producer Feng Ji revealed it would take at least 15 hours to beat the game. Many things would have changed in that period, like the move to Unreal Engine 5, and it's possible that said playtime only referred to the main quest. Even if Black Myth: Wukong is a linear experience, it offers optional bosses, some beyond your current combat abilities to tackle. A spokesperson told Eurogamer in June of 2024 that some levels are much bigger than those in recent hands-on previews, so there should be some hidden areas and secrets to uncover. Tells a complete story. In September of 2020, IGN China visited Game Science and went hands-on with the title after it was first revealed. At the time, the developer expressed hope that Black Myth: Wukong would be the start of its own universe based on Chinese myths. Producer Feng Ji also revealed 2 more Black Myth titles, though their development status is obviously unclear. However, Black Myth: Wukong will still present a complete story. In this whole game, we are intentional in telling a complete story, not only about the battles but also about the characters. We pour our heart into building characters with life and blood, and after playing the game, we wanted players to feel not how strong they are, but how related they are to the main character's experience, a spokesperson told Eurogamer. Xbox Series X and S delay. One of the odder developments before the game's release is a delay to the Xbox Series X and S versions. Game Science revealed that it's optimizing the title to meet our quality standards. However, Windows Central's Jez Corden reported hearing whispers and rumors that there was some exclusivity deal for the title on PlayStation. A spokesperson for Microsoft later told Corden that it's excited about the game's launch on Xbox Series X and S and is working with Game Science to bring the game to our platforms. However, it couldn't comment on the deals made by our partners with other platform holders. Whether or not that means an exclusivity agreement is in place, Xbox Series X and S players will have to wait to get their hands on the game. Potential DLC. Future projects in the Black Myth universe aside, Game Science said it may release additional content for Wukong post-launch. There are no microtransactions at launch, but there could be DLC and non-pay-to-win in-game purchases. The latter potentially points towards skins for the Destined one that are simply cosmetic, but we'll need to wait and see. Hey, did you know that we at GamingBolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.